Hi all, I have another fascinating game to show you, Komodo 12.1.1, running on the Monte Carlo tree search version. So there are great videos on YouTube if you want to know about Monte Carlo tree search. It's fascinating. It has like an expansion facility, like simulating lines, which is a little bit different from normal search mechanics of the traditional chess engines, and it can be applied generically to other games as well. That's one of the real beauties of it. So anyway, the Komodo, so Monte Carlo version, playing white in this game. This is a 3-minute game with a 2-second increment. Game presented by Thomas Kaz on August 22nd. So e4 from Komodo. We have Leela playing Sicilian. Knight f3, knight c6. Here is the book moves. This is the end of the book given to both. White castles, now bishop g7, and it looks very logical here, this control of d4. And now this is a slightly interesting move, maybe in a negative sense, because quite often the plan is rook e1. I think that's the more standard move, and maybe build up with, use the c3 square later, maybe sometimes for c3 d4 sometimes. But knight c3 is kind of a bit locked down in a way. So we see d6, very interesting choice here. Not e5, which would kind of justify the knight actually, but d6 is very interesting. And white actually takes on c6 here, which doesn't make sense to me in terms of that knight having possibilities in the centre, unless white's potentially going to liberate later with d4, but it seems hard to do that here without any advantage anyway. d3 is played, and now e5, this lockdown of that d4 square. h3, knight f6. So Leela's not worried about blocking the f-pawn actually, curiously, in this position. There are prospects for knight h5 to f4 later, given that the h3 pawn has moved. It would be difficult to play g3, for example. So a3, as though b4 is of great interest, that's locked down as well. So you can see there's a lockdown on this square, and potentially this square. So dark squares have been locked down. Bishop e3, black castles, queen d2, and now knight h5. Rook a e1, and already a very, very aggressive move from black, f5. But with the bishop pair, this is really kind of very comfortable with this bishop pair to be able to do this and gain space. And threaten actually f4, squashing the bishop. So e takes is played. But if we look at alternatives for a moment, queen c1, this position is very good, even just with the f file, let alone f4. Instead of pushing the bishop back, there's a, which might be a downside for black. There's actually a concrete solution here if needed in this exchange sack, as this shows. This is quite crushing stuff, where the king side, white's king side, is in big trouble basically, and black can get back the exchange with gigantic interest. Have a look at the pinned comments if you want to see the detailed variation notes. But this move, clearly from a visual, from a human visual perspective, has just opened up the g-file. So can this actually be lethal, this g-file? It is pointing a road straight to white's king. Bishop g5, queen e8, which kind of helps black. Potentially the queen wants to go to places like g6 or maybe h5 later once the knight moves. Knight a4, is this showing some dents in black's armour? This knight a4, finally justifying the knight c3 move. We have a beautiful move. Can you guess if I give you 5 seconds? Okay, classic Leela, rook lift, rook a7 from the queen side. That second row is clear for this, to try and get on that g-file potentially. Knight b6, white is trying for that bishop moves. b3, trying to at least play for knight c4, hitting d6. Is this a bit slow though, this stuff? We have a beautiful idea, h6, offering a pawn now. Absolutely beautiful idea here. So if the bishop goes back, then it's crunch time f4. And if the bishop goes back here, then this position is very, very favourable. Look at this. With the bishop pair with the rook able to potentially get involved. Here's an example, e4 here. Actually, the queen supports e4 because the knight has got no knight h4 here. This is very, very awkward for white, this position. For example, here, knight f4 protects e6 and threatens queen g2 mate. So this position is just absolutely winning, because now that pawn's pinned because of queen g2 checkmate as well. So that kind of situation is absolutely winning. You might ask about something else here, like knight. What if the knight went back here? Then bishop e5 check. Look at these beautiful bishops pointing at white's king. This is absolutely crushing. Look at that pressure, 1, 2, 3, 4 on g3. And it can get even worse now, because after rook f3, black can play the undermining move after taking here, e3, and that's absolute slaughter for white's pawn chain around the king. Look at that huge amount of coordination. This is just very, very destructive and absolutely winning for black. So this is a kind of continuation which could occur. That's just hopeless, stopping all the checks, e6 and e8, and this position actually exploits the queen there. Fascinating variation. But if we look at alternative here, so in this line, instead of queen g6, to show the futility of this position, queen e4, bishop c3 check, for example, rook f1 is checkmate. It's just crushing that coordination and the attack. So bishop h4 doesn't seem to have too much going for it after queen g6, basically. So we have this taking the sacrificed pawn. So Leela takes on h6, and here another very clever move, rook f6, with the idea now that, well, the queen went back. The idea was that if queen g5, then there's rook g6, because if takes, then there's rook takes g2 and winning the queen. So the queen's pushed all the way back here to c1. We have rook g7, really wonderful stuff. That g-file is really quickly celebrated, basically, by Leela here. King h2, knight f4, celebrating, you know, this is very difficult to shift that knight at the moment. We have knight h4, seems very artificial looking, and you'd be right to think that. It's just begging for queen h5, this move. If rook g1, then queen h5 anyway. It's just horrible. Queen d2, knight takes h3, for example. This position is a beautiful variation where f4 check and taking here. This is actually completely winning this stuff. If we look at it, it's absolutely gorgeous variations which could end in checkmate there. So yeah, it's very, very difficult for white here. So this move knight h4 doesn't seem to be very helpful and is not very helpful. g3, we have knight takes h3. Now queen d1 was played here. On king takes, then there's f4 check from the bishop, king h2, and another beautiful variation, absolutely stunning, queen takes h4 check, and rook h6 is a mating net. There's no real defense against this. White could try sacking the queen and do this, but it's checkmate, basically. So queen d1, we have rook g4, not wanting the exchange of queens and keeping the pressure up. So on queen h6, then this position is still okay for black anyway. It's a very strong position. Knight c8, and yeah, that's total desperation in a lost position. It can actually just be taken here. Again, let's have a look at this just for fun. Rook takes h4 check, f4 check. This is just absolutely winning checkmate. So knight c8 out of total desperation. f4, big discovery check coming. Annoyance check, and this is just total desperate moves. Rook takes e5. That's just taken. This is just total desperation. And here it's adjudicated as a win for black. Yeah, black has, for example, rook takes, not rook takes, just rook takes h4. Yeah, I think that's one way of losing, actually, rook g3. But rook takes h4, for example, looks absolutely crushing, among other things. So anyway, it was adjudicated as a win for black here. Really a massacre of Komodo 12.1.1 running MCTS, the MCTS version, which is, to be fair, slightly experimental and weaker than the main Komodo engine. But nevertheless, there was a really entertaining match between the two. So there might be some more games than that match soon on this channel. Hope you enjoyed this one. I think it's pretty instructive, the way Leela attacks and sacrifices a pawn to open up that road on the G file there. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.